Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going a bit deeper than just the surface story of Daniel in the lion's den. Really digging in.
Yeah, it's a story many people know, but there's so much beneath the surface.
Exactly. We're using excerpts from Unbreakable, Daniel's Faith, Daniel's Courage, and God's Deliverance in the lion's den.
A great resource for this.
Our goal, really, is to understand what made Daniel's faith so, remarkable under that kind of intense pressure.
It's about grasping the core principles,
Yeah.
what this famous story actually illustrates.
Right. So let's jump in with the first key idea from our source, unwavering faith. Daniel's choice in the face of death.
Okay, that title itself points to two big things, doesn't it? His faith wasn't shaky, and he actively chose something when facing death.
It wasn't passive belief.
No, not at all. It was about how that faith drove a specific, critical decision.
So let's unpack that unwavering faith bit first. The source points out this wasn't like a sudden thing for Daniel. It mentions his whole life in Babylon, things he did way back, and that line in chapter 6, as he had done previously.
Yeah, that phrase is key. It shows a history, a pattern.
So this steadfastness was built over time.
Absolutely. It wasn't crisis faith.
Yeah.
It was his baseline, part of his everyday life. So when the pressure came...
He was already grounded.
Exactly. Drawing on years of consistent practice.
Then there's the in the face of death part, this royal decree. It's pretty dramatic.
Oh, definitely. No praying to anyone but the king. Or else, lions.
And the source hints this wasn't just some random law, right? It might have been aimed squarely at Daniel.
Well, yeah. They knew he prayed. They knew his routine. It seems pretty convenient, doesn't it? Like a trap.
Using his own faithfulness against him.
It really paints a picture. His enemies kind of weaponize his predictability, his commitment. Makes you think, what kind of faith makes you that consistent?
He wasn't naive about it, though. Which brings us to Daniel's choice.
Right. The lions are waiting, basically, and what does he do?
He goes home, opens his windows, and prays, just like always.
Deliberately. The source stresses that. It wasn't an accident, not forgetfulness.
He knew the law. He knew the penalty.
That's the core of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
It wasn't panic. It was a conscious weighing of options. Earthly life versus something else.
His commitment to God.
You have to wonder what was going through his head, knowing what would likely happen.
And that connects the faith and choice. The source ties them together directly. It says his unwavering faith is what allowed him to make that choice in the face of death.
It wasn't just belief in something, it was belief that acted. It gave him the strength, the framework to prioritize his faith over survival itself.
It's powerful. Faith as the driver, not just a passenger.
Yeah, a force shaping his decisions under the most extreme pressure imaginable.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit to the next idea. The lion's den, a testament to Daniel's devotion.
Ah, the den itself. This title frames it not just as the place of punishment, but as proof. Evidence, really.
A testament to his devotion. So what's the devotion part?
Well, the source brings up his prayer life again, that consistent, as he had done previously, but also his work record.
Right, he was apparently blameless in his job.
Totally. And the source suggests this integrity came from his reverence for God. His enemies couldn't attack his work.
So they had to attack his faith.
Exactly. It shows his devotion wasn't just, a Sunday thing. It affected everything, his public service, his ethics.
Which made him vulnerable in this specific way.
Precisely. Because it was so central to who he was.
So then, the king's decree and Daniel's response. The law made his prayer illegal.
A direct hit on that devotion we were just talking about.
And his response, keep praying, openly.
Which just underscores how deep that commitment ran. It was non-negotiable for him.
Which leads directly to entering the lion's den. He's caught, condemned, thrown in. The den is the direct outcome of his devotion.
It's stark, isn't it? Cause and effect. His faithfulness leads straight to, what everyone assumed was certain death.
It looked like devotion led to disaster.
From a human perspective, absolutely. A horrific end.
But then the final piece. The den as a testament. His survival flicks everything.
Right. Suddenly, the death sentence becomes proof. Validation.
The fact the lions didn't touch him is presented as, divine intervention?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
A sign that vindicated his loyalty. The source suggests the miracle wasn't just about saving Daniel. It was a statement about his devotion.
So the place of execution becomes a place of affirmation.
Exactly. Powerful turnaround.
Okay, that leads nicely into the next idea. Higher allegiance. Daniel's obedience to God above all.
Yeah, this gets right to the conflict's core. who do you ultimately answer to?
First, the source reminds us about his earthly allegiance. Daniel wasn't some kind of anti-government rebel.
No, not at all. He was a top official, served King Darius diligently, faithfully,
Loyal, but within limits.
within ethical and, for him, religious boundaries. He wasn't opposed to the king's authority in general. The problem came when that authority clashed with what he saw as God's authority.
Which happened with the conflicting demands. The decree: pray only to the king for 30 days.
And Daniel's lifelong practice? Pray to God 3 times a day. Direct clash.
No wiggle room there.
None. It hit the absolute center of his spiritual life. It wasn't a small request. It was asking him to pause his relationship with God.
Something he just couldn't do. Which brings us to choosing higher allegiance.
He knew the decree. He knew the lions. The source is clear on his awareness.
Yet he prays anyway.
It wasn't impulsive. It was a deliberate prioritization. God first, king second, especially in this matter.
He wasn't looking for trouble, but he wouldn't compromise on this.
Precisely. He recognized a hierarchy. And for him, God's command, or rather his relationship with God, was at the very top.
So obedience above all. By breaking the king's law, he was showing his obedience to God was paramount.
Yeah, what looks like disobedience to human law was, in his view, obedience to divine law. It throws that potential conflict into really sharp relief, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
Okay, let's look at his character more broadly. With an excellent spirit, Daniel's integrity and courage under threat.
This ties his actions back to his fundamental nature. His excellent spirit wasn't just about being good at his job. It fueled his integrity and his courage.
So an excellent spirit and integrity. The source says this spirit got him promoted.
And it showed in his work. Completely trustworthy. No corruption, no negligence.
Which again connects back to his faith, shaping his whole life.
I think so. The source implies his integrity wasn't just a personality trait, but flowed from his devotion. It was holistic.
Then the threat. We've touched on this, the decree designed by his enemies.
Yes, specifically targeting him, forcing that choice. Faith or life. And he knew the danger was real. Lions aren't metaphorical here.
No, very real, very terrifying.
His enemies counted on his integrity. In a twisted way, they knew he wouldn't bend.
Leading to courage under threat. Despite knowing the danger, he prays openly. That's highlighted as courage.
And it is. Real courage isn't not being afraid. It's acting on your convictions despite the fear.
Praying, knowing it meant the lion's den, that takes immense courage.
Courage rooted in that deep faith, that excellent spirit.
And finally, connecting spirit, integrity, and courage. The idea is his character, built over years, prepared him.
Right. His integrity wasn't separate from his courage. His lifelong excellent spirit gave him the inner resources to face this ultimate test without compromising.
It wasn't a sudden burst of bravery, but consistent character shining through.
Exactly. An outflow of who he already was.
Okay, now let's focus specifically on the act of prayer itself. Praying against the decree. Daniel's defiance for divinity.
This reframes the prayer, doesn't it? Not just worship, but resistance. Defiance, but for God.
So first, the decree again. That strict law, no praying to anyone but Darius for 30 days. Specifically targeting prayer.
It wasn't just political. It had a religious dimension, demanding worship, essentially. A direct challenge to freedom of worship.
Then, Daniel's prayer. Knowing all this, he goes home, prays as usual, openly.
No hiding, no changing the routine, making it crystal clear I will not comply on this point.
Which means praying against the decree. His prayer was the violation, a deliberate act of breaking that specific law.
Yes, the act itself became the resistance. Quiet, maybe, but incredibly powerful defiance through spiritual practice.
And the final part, defiance for divinity, explains why. It wasn't just rebellion for rebellion's sake.
No, it was principled. The source presents it as standing against a human law that overstepped its bounds, infringing on his duty to God.
Prioritizing divine law as he understood it.
Clearly stating, my ultimate allegiance lies elsewhere. When human and divine laws clash, he chose the divine.
Which leads us almost to the end point. Ready to die. The depth of Daniel's commitment to God.
This really hits the ultimate measure of his faith, doesn't it? Willing to die rather than disobey God. It speaks volumes about his commitment.
The first step is recognizing the commitment to God. Again, the source points to his lifelong pattern. Faithful, consistent, as he had done previously.
It wasn't shallow, it was deep-rooted, tested over time. That consistency makes his willingness to die believable in context.
Then, acknowledging the penalty for disobeying the commitment, the decree is explicit. Pray and you die.
No ambiguity, he knew the stakes, The cost of defiance was potentially everything.
Yet he proceeds, accepting the risk. By praying openly, knowing the consequence, he's implicitly showing he's ready.
His actions are louder than words here. Continuing his practice without hesitation showed he accepted that ultimate risk for his faith.
Ready to die for his convictions.
It seems so, which reveals the depth of commitment. The source concludes that his loyalty to God was stronger than his survival instinct, stronger than the fear of, well, lions.
It's an extraordinary level of dedication.
It is. It's when faith is tested against that most basic human fear, death, and holds firm. It really shows the power belief can have.
Okay, our final core idea sort of wraps it all up. Faith tested by fire and lions, the story of Daniel's stand.
Nice imagery there. Fire suggests intense trial, and linking it to the lions makes it concrete. It frames the whole thing as a test, and Daniel's response is his stand.
So first, faith present. We need to remember Daniel already had deep faith. His prayer, his integrity, that was the foundation.
Absolutely. The faith wasn't created by the trial. It was revealed by the trial. That pre-existing foundation was crucial.
And then test trial. The decree, engineered by enemies, was the crucible, the direct test. Compromise or face death.
A calculated attempt to break him, wasn't it? Pitting his core beliefs against his survival. Maximum pressure.
And the specific form of that test, tested by lions. Not abstract danger, but a very real, gruesome threat.
Yeah, the lions make it visceral. A trial by ordeal, you could say, in the most terrifying way.
And finally, Daniel's stand. His response, keep praying, stand firm, that was his stand.
He didn't buckle, didn't look for loopholes. He just stood his ground, remained true to his faith, even facing that horror.
Providing this lasting example of resilience.
Exactly. Unwavering faith under the most extreme test imaginable.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, wow, we've really seen Daniel's unwavering faith shape his choices, haven't we?
Definitely. And how the lion's den wasn't just punishment, but a testament to his devotion, his allegiance to God coming first.
His integrity, his courage under threat, his prayers defiance, it all builds this picture.
And that readiness to die, showing the sheer depth of his commitment. The whole story framed as this intense test of faith.
And seeing him as this model of uncompromised faith, living in a challenging environment like Babylon.
It really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? As you consider the story, it pushes you to think about conviction.
Yeah, what does it mean for us today to hold on to principles when there's a cost?
What are our own lion's dens, maybe? Situations where our beliefs clash with pressures around us. What does it mean to live with integrity, with conviction in those moments?
It's definitely a story that makes you reflect on your own core values and how you live them out.
A powerful narrative indeed.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it's given you plenty to think about.